Welcome to Ambition's Apex, your guide to mastering the art of physique transformation and achieving peak performance across all arenas of life. Our mission is not just to sculpt bodies, but to change lives, empowering you towards excellence. Dive in with us as we explore insights and strategies designed to elevate you towards your journey of self-improvement. Enjoy the ascent. Alrighty, we got another episode going. Today we have Danielle on board. Now, if you don't know who we are already, I own a coaching business called Saga Coaching. We deal with physique enhancement, health systems for high-performing individuals, physique athletes, bodybuilders, etc. Danielle is a coach on the team as well. So today we're going to be just having a pretty organic discussion about her journey so far, as well as just some of both of our perspectives as far as mentality towards, just general improvement in physique progress, as well as other areas of life, etc. So Danielle, say hello to the people for us.
Hey, hello.
Yeah, so we're going to avoid too many formalities today, and we're just going to kind of let things flow. But I do want to kind of preface things by saying that, we're not here to just hype you up or to drive a ton of motivation. We're big, firm believers in discipline, consistency, staying locked in over long periods of time. So we're not really ones to sit here and just rah hype you up, get you motivated to do short-term kind of durations of, high intensity activity. We want to be able to sustain the effort long term so that we can really see the results of that. And Danielle really, really embodies this. Her and I started working together a very long time ago. I want to say 3 to 4 years at this point, right? Something like that. And she came to me, wanted to compete, had competed in the past, but wanted to really take it to another level. And, we went through long durations, off-season phases, growing phases, really fine-tuning the health side of things and just general functionality with her physiology and everything, and got things really dialed in, went into her first contest prep, and we secured an overall at the first regional show that we did. We went on to do nationals, realized pretty quickly that we needed a little bit more muscle on the frame, and went on to accomplish just that, and then earned a pro card at North Americans. So it's been quite some journey. Now, Danielle, what are some things that you've kind of picked up along the way? Let's think of maybe one specific thing, something that you've picked up along the way of just understanding that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Obviously, where people are probably sick of hearing that little phrase when it comes to bodybuilding, but it's very, very true. What's maybe one thing that you kind of picked up along the way that's really solidified that in your mind that, just checking the boxes all the time? Because honestly, quite frankly, in terms of athletes I've worked with, you are so level-headed. You just check the boxes all the time. You've been able to maintain sustainability with this for very long durations without even I don't even get a hint of doubts creeping in. I'm sure you do get those, right? But, it doesn't manifest where it starts to really surface a lot, and you just put in the work for long periods of time and there's no issues. So what are some things that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that about me and my character. I think probably one thing, and I'm sure it's been said before, but you truly have to enjoy what you're doing. If you don't enjoy the training, if you don't enjoy the nutrition, if you don't enjoy the aspects off the stage, you're not going to last as long. It's going to be maybe a one season kind of thing, and then it's not sustainable. That's been, and when you start out bodybuilding, it all is new and exciting and it's fun, but then, as the years progress, you still have to enjoy it, and things get more difficult and more challenging, especially moving now into pro shows. You have to enjoy the monotony of things, and you have to be able to sustain that in order to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started my own bodybuilding journey, for those that don't know, I did my first show in 2017. It's now 2026. I did 3 total shows. I don't, and I didn't quite have what it took, genetically speaking, to really take it where I wanted to go. Not only in terms of, I'm sure if, others would probably argue, I'm not using that as an excuse or anything like that. I'm sure if I would have kept pushing things, I probably could have turned pro at some point if I really, stayed stayed in it for the long haul. But in terms of health and stuff, it just wasn't my thing. And I was far better at coaching than I was as a bodybuilding athlete. Went all in on that. But, when I first started bodybuilding, before it became quite as popular as it is now, I would say that it's become a lot more commercialized. Not a lot more, but it's become more commercialized because of, social media, the hybrid kind of influencer, bodybuilding athlete, pro bodybuilding athlete sort of thing, podcast, all that kind of stuff, which is a very positive thing for the sport. Don't get me wrong. But when I started, and probably prior to that and generations before me, it was like, to be a bodybuilder, you kind of had to have some screws loose. And that was like the thing that we always heard, right? Like, to be bodybuilding, you got to be like this different kind of animal. Like, you got to be this, like, it takes a lot to go into bodybuilding. And like, to be a bodybuilder, you're kind of a mental outlier. And now it's like everybody gets really excited about competing. They see like I said, the hybrid influencer kind of bodybuilding athlete sort of thing, and they get really excited about it. They want to try it out. I want to do bodybuilding. Their friends are doing bodybuilding, like, all this kind of stuff. Everybody gets really excited about it. And now it's become this thing where, a lot more people want to do it, which is, like I said, a very positive thing for the sport. We want more people involved, but I think that people are kind of jumping into it without realizing like what the sport is really about when it comes to the mental side of things, like the duration of which you have to do very monotonous things, the same thing, just repetitive over and over and over and over again for years to really reach a point where, you're relatively satisfied with your progress, and sometimes, you're never, I mean, obviously we're never quite satisfied with the progress, right? We're always chasing more, 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 a little bit more conditioning, a little bit more muscle, et cetera, right? So, I just don't think that many people that are just kind of jumping into it because they saw their favorite influencer doing a show, or they saw just all their friends are doing it. I just don't think that they're quite prepared mentally for, what it really takes. And so I know that we've like talked about recently with just general monotony and making things boring. And that's like probably hard for a lot of people to hear that that's like what works. But, there's a lot of things that we can also do to make things sustainable, right? So it doesn't always have to be this really just bland kind of lifestyle, right? There's things that we can do to keep things sustainable. And a lot of our coaching strategies involve us finding where we can eliminate too much restriction where it's unnecessary, if that makes sense. We were talking about just the monotony that bodybuilding involves and how we have to really do monotonous things over and over again. It's very repetitive. It's very just, it's the same things over and over again. So I just don't think that a lot of athletes are quite prepared for that. Now, Danielle, do you think that, you have an inclination towards just being that kind of individual to begin with? Like, it's just kind of how you go about doing things?
I'd probably say, like, before I started bodybuilding, no. I mean, not that I would have noticed, but I think, like, as humans, we thrive on structure. Working with like middle school age students, like, they thrive on structure. I think we tend to like that. But like you said, sometimes we have to have like flexibility in order to be human too. And we can't always be like robots. As sometimes I'd love to be a robot and have everything perfect and precise all the time. That ends up making things worse down the road. So yeah, I think I do honestly. I like the structure. I like to, now that I've been bodybuilding, that's my natural tendency is to have structure in place, have routine. But then as I've grown in bodybuilding, understanding, okay, I can't do that all the time. I need to, devote time where I can spend with like friends and family and have that flexibility with them, and understanding what seasons, in bodybuilding are more practical for that and what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we know kind of like with habit formation, right? Like if you do something consistently over and over again becomes a habit, right? And then we start to just it becomes less of an effort and more of a second nature kind of thing. Now, do you think on more of a macro sense with like your journey with bodybuilding where it was very much delayed gratification, it was like these little habits accumulating into a bigger kind of win, longer term success. Do you think that that kind of solidified, like, hey, this kind of lifestyle where I maintain structure and monotony, it makes sense to continue doing so because it leads to just positive outcomes long term?
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, that plays into, like, you have to enjoy the process, right? If you're hating it the whole way through, you're not going to keep doing it. But we do live in that the world of instant gratification, the Amazon 2-day shipping kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I do feel like with bodybuilding, I actually like the delayed gratification because it makes that win so much, or not that it has to be a win, but like a stage win, but small wins along the way, like that much better and that much more meaningful.
Yeah, a lot more fulfillment, right? Now, I do think, like, us as a society, we need to, I mean, I'm sure that we do this already a bit, but, normalizing the fact that we don't always have to enjoy the process. Sometimes the process sucks, sometimes it's like, sometimes you like have a loss, or sometimes it's just like, I'm sick of this. Like, sometimes those feelings happen to everybody, right? So, I think, like, normalizing that too, like, I mean, we talk about that too. It's like, don't quit, right? Like, obviously, like, don't quit at the first sign of like, oh, you're sick of this process, or you're frustrated, or like doubts are creeping in, etc. Right? But I think just continue to normalize, like, hey, sometimes the process sucks. It's just a part of it. Sometimes, like, we have to things come in, creep in that are unexpected, or like something happens, or whatever it may be, right? That's like threatening to derail your progress. It's just, normalizing that that stuff happens to even the best of us, and that, persistent, just pursuing regardless, and like getting through it and digging through it is extremely important, right? And I feel like that's kind of like a generic message, but it's valid in this context. So,
No.
tell us a little bit more about like where you're at mentally with your career as of right now. Now that you turned pro this past year, so where are we at mentally now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited in our growing phase now, so or at the beginning of it. So I'm just excited. We started a new training split fairly recently, so having that in place has been a fun journey to like have new exercises to chase improvement on, and joining Saga as a coach now, that's like another element to that has been really exciting. I'm really excited. I'm thinking more on the stage side of things, that's nerve-wracking for sure
Mhm.
because it is a new level that I've never been at before, but at the core, I'm excited.
Yeah, it can be a pretty big jump too, from like the amateur ranks to the pro ranks, and it's a whole different animal. And some of the pros that you're going to be stepping on stage with have been there for quite some time, and have maybe stepped on the Olympia stage multiple times. So, it's a whole new level of pressure, but pressure creates diamonds, and you're the kind of athlete that's going to be able to withstand that pressure and turn into a diamond. So it's only a matter of time, just like it was only a matter of time of you turning pro and everything as well. So, yeah, I'm really excited about it as well. It's bodybuilding is like a never ending chase for more extremity, like in terms of muscularity and conditioning, etc. Depending on the division, sometimes it's like moving away from extremity, but really depends. That's usually more like bikini and fit model that we have to worry about that kind of stuff. But how has your relationship kind of changed with bodybuilding since you turned pro? I mean, which was still pretty recently, but is there anything that's changed for you?
I do feel I feel a difference. I mean, it's the same structure that's been in place, the same like meal prep, training, all of that is still the same, but I feel a little different in that sense that, after turning pro, it did take a couple weeks, couple months to really like sink in that I am a pro, but now I feel like that is solidified, and like, that validation that I belong here and I can help. Not that I wasn't able to help others out, but I have that credential, I guess, now to help others out in their pursuit of bodybuilding and competing as well. So it hasn't changed, but it has changed.
100%. And that's like one of your biggest superpowers, I think, as a coach, is the fact that you truly lead by example in that regard, and you've taken it as far as many athletes want to take it, and you've done the things necessary in order to get there, right? So, turning pro, is a lot of people like argue that it's like this easy feat nowadays, and it's not. It's never been easy to turn pro. There may be more pro cards being handed out, but there's also more competitors competing, and like, national level shows are getting bigger, and that's a good thing, and more people are coming out of the woodwork too, in terms of like genetic anomalies too, so a lot of people argue that it's like, oh, it's so easy to get a pro card now. I'm like, I wish, because I would be pro, but I don't know. You know what I mean? It's not easy, and there's always those genetic outliers that may like have a little bit shorter of a journey to get to that point, right? And Now, I do wanna, like I wanted to mention something about genetics today. So, when it comes to genetics, since I mentioned it just now, it's so relative, right? So, you can have an individual that may have the affinity towards an immense amount of muscle tissue and muscle retention, have great structure, like all these different things, but they could have genetic predispositions to all kinds of health issues, for example, or lack of joint integrity that prevent them from even turning pro to begin with. We want to think of genetics as like a relative thing. People use it as such a general, broad statement, like, "Oh, that person has good genetics," or this, and it's not that. It's just relative, and it's on a. It's multiple different, like, specific aspects to genetics, and then there's like spectrums on all of them, right? So, like I said, joint integrity, for example, or genetic predisposition to like heart disease, for example. Like somebody that's hammering PEDs away for years isn't going to be able to handle that as well as somebody that maybe doesn't have the genetic propensity towards heart disease, right? So these are the things that we want to think about when it comes to talking about genetics. So sometimes individuals may not be quite as gifted when it comes to muscularity or muscle retention, but they're maybe mentally in a little bit more balance of a place, like genetically speaking, because, mentality, like temperament, that kind of stuff can be genetically passed on as well. And then obviously we're talking about also nature and nurture too. So the genetic component of like how have genetics manifested over time and express themselves over time based on environment. So a little bit of a tangent there. I just wanted to mention that since I had touched on genetics, like, we really tossed around that word a little bit too generally when it comes to bodybuilding. And I think that it needs to be a little bit more specifically used when it comes to stuff like, oh, that person genetically has great structure. Like, okay, fantastic. That's a little bit more specific of a way to use it, right? Versus just somebody has great genetics. Now, somebody could have the structure, the muscle mass, the muscle retention capabilities, and very low genetic predispositions to anything, have crazy discipline, etc. But those are the C bums and stuff, right? So we talked about how your relationships kind of changed a little bit. We're excited, and I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of like identity and stuff. So tell us a little bit more about like your identity outside of bodybuilding. What are some things that you enjoy doing? How does bodybuilding kind of affect maybe the outside world a little bit more in terms of, your lifestyle and how it can positively impact it as well?
Yeah, I think it's obviously grown over the past couple years. And changed. When I first started bodybuilding, I made a lot of mistakes. This was back in 2018, different coach and all that stuff, but, I jumped into it not knowing, like, anything about bodybuilding. I competed forever, and I had never gone to a, show before, which I wouldn't recommend. Again, there's been a lot of, I guess, like you mentioned earlier with, like, social media, there's a lot more information out there now than there was, I feel like, when I first started competing. Needless to say, back then, I was still doing a lot of, I was structured, but made a lot of mistakes, things that were like unnecessary. I was still like going out and, I maybe like would go out and still have a drink or things that weren't, things that I would consider doing now. For like fast forward to today, what I'd say, I am a lot more structured. Bodybuilding does consume a lot of my life, and that's the reality of it. I don't have when I think of like my other friends that don't do bodybuilding, they understand. My true friends have stuck around, they understand me and they know, they'll understand if I can't go to something because I have to do X, Y, and Z for bodybuilding. We're good friends and we're that they're still around for that reason, right? They know at the end of the day, I'm still there for them and they're still there for me. But it's like a second job because you're either having to meal prep or train or do cardio or get your sleep in on top of work. And so it is a lot. I think this past off season or prior to now, last year, and then the beginning of prep is where I really tried to focus on understanding like how I can manage relationships and friendships and family before prep gets too deep, I guess. And so I would make it a point to like plan out things that I could go do, whether I was in prep or not, things that I would have the energy for and just stuff like that. So I could have a little bit more balance with normal, quote unquote, normal life. and then my bodybuilding life.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like bodybuilding and like not drinking to tell you who your real friends are, right? I heard you mention that at the beginning of that. You know, you kind of, the people that kind of stayed around were like the real friends, right? And it's interesting how that kind of plays out because bodybuilding, it's very time consuming, as you mentioned. It consumes a lot of your life, and the people that are still there supporting you, regardless of you being able to go out and like have a drink with them. Sometimes those are the ones that it tells you that they were a little bit self-serving, right? They just wanted you for the company or whatever. Maybe they weren't. I read a lot of philosophy. So Aristotle says that, the a true friend is somebody that wants the best for you just for the sake of like it being the best for you, right? Like it's not, there's no self-serving. It's just somebody wanting the best for you regardless of anything. It's like a completely selfless aspect of just wanting the best for somebody. So, that it tells you a lot and it will weed things out. Bodybuilding will definitely weed that out for you. And so will not drinking as well. So with identity, like, we talk about things like comparison too in bodybuilding. So, that can be a big challenge for athletes where whether it's like like they're in the middle of prep and they're watching other athletes that may be doing their show or trying to figure out who may be doing their show or comparing themselves to, pros or people that have been doing it far longer than them or whatever it may be, comparing it to like the perfect like photos of an athlete in like the perfect lighting and like shot by a photographer, etc. So, is there anything that you've had to overcome as far as the comparison game goes?
Yeah, I mean, we all do it, right? Especially with social media, and it's hard not to compare yourself. I think understanding that things like that, comparison, they say is the thief of joy and all that. But that social media, the things you see online, that's like the highlight reel of people's lives. Even like for me, I post a lot, but I don't post every detail of my life. I don't post the lows necessarily, the struggles that I've had to go through. There's been plenty, but I don't post that. And so you don't see other people's, the 10 plus years of work that they've put in to get where they're at. You might be at the beginning or the middle of your journey and you're comparing yourself to that. Having, with talking about identity, like having a strong understanding of who you are, like your values, your roles, whether you're like a parent, a daughter, a friend, what you do for work, all of that, having that a strong identity outside of bodybuilding. I think that helps with um, when you compare, again, it's not like it's completely unavoidable, but it helps understanding like what you see online. There's the lighting, there's the posing, there's if someone's enhanced versus not. There's so many factors to it that you can appreciate someone else in their physique, but you're a completely different person and you have to be proud in where you're at with your journey.
Yeah, 100%. We talk about like anchors a lot too when it comes to coaching strategies as well. And that's like another one where focusing on the anchor of just your identity and who you are and being able to anchor back into that and owning who you are and being very self aware can be really helpful when it comes to that kind of drift that you may experience when you're playing that comparison game. One thing I don't think anybody ever talks about, or that I haven't really heard anybody talk about, is the comparison. Like coaches experience this too, right? So, we may be comparing ourselves to other coaches, like how many athletes we have on our roster, the kind of car that they're driving, like how much success are they having, all that kind of stuff. And I've always done a pretty good job of like staying away from that. Unfortunately, I learned a lot of that through my own bodybuilding journey too, like not playing the comparison game or worrying about who I was going to be stepping on stage with or comparing myself to pros or whatever it may be, maybe using that as like inspiration, but definitely staying away from it as being some sort of detriment, right? And when I launched Saga, like we've always just been so focused on ourselves. Like I don't care to necessarily follow trends or make an effort to follow trends or to like try to be like any other coaches or be like any other team necessarily. Obviously, like everybody follows trends to some extent, right? Like it's just part of human nature and like how we orient ourselves within the world and our current society and stuff, but and socially obviously. But I try to stay away from trying to follow anybody else or do what everybody else is doing. I just kind of do what Saga does and focus on Saga and focus on building my own thing. And it's paid off for me. So it paid off for me when I was a bodybuilder as well, and I see it paying off for athletes all the time when they're just really focused on their own identity and who they are and becoming the best version of themselves, right? That's such a kind of a corny generic term at this point, but it's very true. There's a reason that like certain phrases get used so often. It's because they're true, right? So, when it comes to staying locked in and staying locked into your identity and really fulfilling like your own, I guess, destiny, for a lack of a better word, right? I'm not necessarily a believer in predetermination, but when it comes to like motivation versus like commitment, because we talk about, how motivation is fleeting and how it's just like it's not something to be reliant on. We want to focus on structure and anchors and all that kind of stuff, right? And then committing to those things too. So, talk a little bit about what you've experienced in terms of not being reliant on motivation, because obviously, like, we all enjoy a little bit of motivation here and there. We want to get a little bit excited about what's going on, right? But talk about how that's like not something to be reliant on and how that's paid off for you as an athlete.
Yeah. I think there's definitely sprinkles of motivation throughout, right? And that's like the cherry on top. Like I mentioned earlier, like the training plan changed, or that's exciting, that's new, that gave me a little burst of motivation. But it's not like I'm looking for a new training plan every 2 weeks. That was like after months and months and I don't know how long of having a structured training plan, but I think having your commitment of like, and that's with the structure. Like I meal prep on a certain day. I have my specific days that I know I can get to the gym and devote that time to training. And if are waiting for motivation to come around, you're not gonna achieve your goals because I don't want to go do cardio every day, or whenever I'm like, okay, it's my day to go do cardio. I'm not like ready to go all the time, but I know it needs to get done. Like it's a part of my plan. I get up and I go do it. Yeah. So it's not waiting for the motivation, but having that those structures in place. And again, it's taken me, time to get where I am now. Like I said, when I was starting out, it's not like that was necessarily I was still checking those boxes, but it was a learning process along the way of, not depending on motivation, not depending on, like, my mood to be, like, always wanting to do it.
Yeah, one thing I see often and kind of I have seen throughout my coaching career is a lot of like shiny object syndrome. So it's like always looking for the new thing, right? Like where's the even with like peptides now, it's like everybody's like peptides. Like who's using peptides and how can I use peptides? It's always like the shiny object syndrome, or like whose coaching team is the most popular right now, or who's like what coach has like the most Olympians? I want to join that team. It's like the shiny object syndrome. That's like a telltale sign that you're leaning a little bit too far into motivation, in my opinion. So, if that's you and you feel a little bit called out, I apologize. But, some self reflection would probably be helpful because I think that, if you eliminate some of that like shiny object syndrome driven behavior and focus on a little bit more of, just the systems and staying anchored into your current position, your current identity, I think that it would pay off a lot for any athlete listening here. So, talk a little bit more about staying locked in when nothing is happening, because when we talk about motivation, like I said, it's like it's easy to start losing, like, paying attention to the wrong things, or just losing, the drive, etc., when things are just really monotonous over long durations of time. How do we stay locked in when nothing is happening, when there isn't a show or like a carrot dangled right in front of our faces, like some sort of aim? It's good to have aim, and it's good to have like know where we're going and stuff. That's why I do a lot of like phasing out for my athletes so that they know what's going on and where we're heading. And there's positivity to that because, it's a lot of neurotransmitter activity stuff where we want to have something to aim towards. But when nothing's happening and you feel like it's like, oh, this is a really long phase and I'm just having to do the same thing, there hasn't been any adjustments to my program in a couple of weeks, what are some things that you need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think keeping in mind, like, if fast change in bodybuilding is usually not the best change, your like progress should be slow. That's going to be like a healthier approach. If you're having these like fast weight gain or fat loss, like that's not going to be healthy down the road. That's again that wanting that quick fix, that instant gratification, and that's just going to hurt you down the road. But going back to your identity of like knowing who you are. Like I know I am a disciplined person. So that's one of my traits. And I pride myself on it. I know I'm patient. So I know that if, my plan isn't going to change for X amount of weeks, I'm okay with that. I trust my coach. I trust you. You've gotten me this far, right? And so having faith and having trust in your coach is another like big, I think, point to have. Obviously ask questions when you have them, but if you are constantly wanting that change, you have to be coachable, I guess is what I'm getting at. Having standards for yourself, like I mentioned cardio earlier, like I'm not never have I'll I guess give my little like myself a little perk on like if I've ever been prescribed like cardio, I have never skipped cardio. I will make it happen. Same thing with like train. I've never skipped something. So having like define yourself to help stay locked in, you know?
Yeah, a lot of it's just making things non-negotiable, right? Like when you just it's just like I have to get this done. There's no it's just my duty. It's not like something that's optional. Whenever I because I'm human as well and like obviously I'm not bodybuilding anymore, so maybe like my goals aren't quite as serious. Like I really just I stay disciplined with my training and everything because I just want to look and feel my best and I also want to lead by example and I feel far better when I'm training and I'm doing my cardio and it translates into like it's just this cohesive thing like my work when I'm really disciplined with my work it translates into my fitness and my fitness vice versa, right? There's no secret to that. Like a lot of hard charging successful individuals always give a lot of credit to their exercise and their nutrition and stuff and their ability to perform. It's kind of a lot of parallels, right? But with that being said, I when I'm because I make it, like, non-negotiable too, like, I still do my cardio, I do my resistance training, my nutrition is very locked in, like, 6 days a week at least, and even then, on a day that I have, like, a free meal or whatever, it's just like, I pretty much ride the same level of structure that I would implement into an athlete with just a little bit more flexibility because 'cause I'm not a bodybuilder anymore, right? So, just making things really non-negotiable. Whenever I do have some sort of deviation from that, I do get a little bit like upset with myself, right? Just like anybody would. Just like a lot of athletes would, where it's like I missed one session of cardio, like I'm just really not. But obviously, like I know well enough to not like overcompensate, not to like do more or whatever it is, or like eat less because I missed one. So I make sure to I definitely don't do those things. But I'm human too. But just making things non-negotiable, and the more you make them non-negotiable, the more likelihood they're just gonna it's just gonna get done. Right? So, not negotiating with yourself, not like whenever you start to feel those thoughts creep in where it's like, well, like if I just put like, no, 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 just knock that shit off, get in the gym, get it done. I'm the same way with like chores and stuff, right? If I see something in front of me that can get done like really quickly, I'm not allowed to skip over it. I have to just get it done. There's just no negotiation with and the more you do this in all areas of your life, the more you'll stop doing it. It's just like this momentum and this like compounding effect where you become very like anti-procrastination towards things. And procrastination is usually from like some sort of negotiation you're having with yourself. And then anxiety is like the result of like the essentially the putting things off, right? So you're putting something off and then I always say the antidote to anxiety is like action too. So it's usually like anxiety is usually the result of there's something sitting there that needs to get done that you haven't done. And it's like just building up in your mind until you get it done. So just getting it done all the time really helps with mental health as well, right? Do you feel that when you're checking the boxes and just getting stuff done and getting as many things done as possible, you feel like it improves your mental health as well in that aspect?
Yeah. And that's why I was like, I don't know how extreme this sounds. I don't know to, other people, but it really is for me. I'm like, if I don't get this done during this time block, it's not going to happen. There's no time the rest of the week for me. That's the way my life is structured. It just I look at my planner the week before, it's the truth, and I have it planned out to a T, and very rarely is there flexibility for me to move things around, and it's awesome if you have that flexibility to move things around, but, I'm not perfect. I will say that, I do have faults and things that I procrastinate sometimes, but, it has definitely helped to, like, when I know something needs to get done, I have to go get it done if I want to or not, and that's bodybuilding or just, like, life things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for me too, it's really helpful because I look back at like periods of my life where I made the most progress and I like kind of look for what aspects of that like or what behaviors kind of drove that forward. And it's usually something along those lines of like I was just locked in, I was just getting shit done all the time. And I wasn't negotiating with myself. I was just making it happen. So sometimes when you're maybe like feeling like things are a little bit monotonous and you're just doing the same things over and over again, just repetition. Think back to maybe a time that there a period of your life where you were doing that at another point and how much progress resulted from that, right? So that always helps me to like look back like periods of time in my life where I made a lot of progress. And it usually like, success leaves clues, right? Even for yourself. So people use that term like success leaves clues and they'll be like looking at somebody else, but sometimes you can do the same thing for yourself. Like, where was I successful? Where have I made a lot of progress in the past? And what was I doing during that time that resulted in that progress? And then just kind of replicate that, right? Or let it solidify or drive you to continue to do the things that you're doing and use that as some level of motivation. Cause like you said, motivation is like a nice little cherry on top. It's just that we don't want to be relying on it. And it's not like I'm like, just kill your motivation, like never let yourself be motivated. That's not the point at all. It's like sometimes giving yourself a little bit of a pat on the back, sometimes getting a little bit of validation is good and it can feel good and move you forward. So sometimes that little bit of emotional boost can be helpful. Think of it more as like I said, like a boost. It's like a little extra boost rather than it being the core driver, the core engine of of what's driving us towards our goals, right? So, I think we kind of underestimate sometimes how destabilizing it can be when results slow down. And we mentioned this a little bit before too, just with like driving through when things may not be happening, right? So we talk about there being like, a carrot dangled in front of you in terms of show date or whatever it may be. But what about when you're like, let's say you're in a growing phase and you're just weight is stable, coach hasn't made any adjustments on plan, not saying that they necessarily need to or anything, right? Sometimes that there just isn't a need for it, even when weight is relatively stable. Training performance is driving up, and maybe it just feels like your progress, like you're looking at your photos every week and they just look the exact same. It can be pretty destabilizing. So, what are some things that you do to help you maintain trust in your coach when that's happening, as well as because that's something that you mentioned earlier that I want to touch on again. But what are some things that you do to like anchor back in and stay locked in and prevent those doubts from creeping in when progress really slows, or it could be in a contest prep too when like fat loss slows, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I've experienced both in prep and off season. I think one thing is on the topic of, trusting your coach, but also expressing how you're feeling to your coach so they're aware of, where your mental state is at. And then they can give you that reassurance of like, this is where we're at right now because of X, Y, and Z. And, this is where maybe looking to the future, like what's projected ahead. So a couple of things. I think changing up some stuff at that point might be beneficial. So maybe kind of what we talked on earlier with like things outside of bodybuilding, enjoying some life things outside of bodybuilding, go bowling, go to the movies, go like get your mind off of things for a little bit. Still have your structure in place, obviously, but sometimes that has helped just having that identity outside of bodybuilding, knowing that like that's not, if bodybuilding was to like go away, or you didn't have if the stage was to go away, I guess, who would you be without it? Unfortunately, like I have seen where people have like their core identity in bodybuilding and they got injured or, didn't have the financial means to prep and they couldn't they weren't able to live that lifestyle anymore and they completely lost their whole identity. They didn't have that. So having I'd say like those close people next to you around you to help keep you grounded too has been really helpful. Whether they're people like just close friends that you've had for a long time or if you've been in bodybuilding for a while, you've probably developed some close bodybuilder friends that can definitely help pull you out of like a negative mental space when you're kind of in a rut of in prep or like I said, off season of like, why are things not changing? I'm not going anywhere. I feel like I'm not progressing. All those like negative thoughts, just talking it out can help.
All right, so some inconvenient timing, but I had maintenance come in to make some repairs and my dog was freaking out. So we are going to kind of pick up where we left off. So we were talking about a lot of different things, discipline, identity, all the people hear this stuff all the time, right? And it's probably like people probably are sick of hearing it, but hopefully we're providing a level of perspective that, may be a little bit different and very hands like we've been in the trenches ourselves with this kind of stuff, right? So now we talked about like delayed this is what I wanted to talk about. We were talking about trusting your coach, right? So trusting your coach is incredibly valuable. So we want to, this is something that I don't hear talked about very often, but I want to harp on this a little bit. So when it comes to trusting your coach, it's no, I mean, it's a little bit different, but obviously, like when it comes to trusting other people in your life, right? Trusting other relationships, whether it's friendship, whether it's your parents, whether it's significant others, etc., right? It's very similar in regards to like in order for there to be a healthy dynamic, there has to be trust on both sides, right? You have to be able to trust yourself. You have to be able to have faith in yourself that you're going to have integrity, as well as having faith in your coach. It's like a similar dynamic, right? There's a mutual trust going on, right? And it's no different than like with friendships, with family. Now, whenever trust starts to deteriorate on one side, that's when like the deterioration of the entire relationship starts to fall apart. Now, sometimes there's like very strong validity to reasons why that trust starts to disintegrate. But oftentimes, and this is what people need to recognize a little bit more of, is that it may be stemming from some level of trauma that you've experienced in the past, something negative outcome that you've had in the past. It may not be like super traumatic necessarily. We don't want to go around calling everything trauma, right? But, sometimes it's that, maybe you had a bad experience with a past coach and now you have trust, like we hear the term trust issues, right? So we want to have a level of self-awareness and understanding, because I've seen it happen more times than I can count, where an athlete has, and not necessarily just with me, right? I see it with like them working with other coaches too, is just like going into it with like trust issues, right? Going into it with like not being able to just give over faith, right? Like, or give, like, have faith towards the process and go into it with the faith and with the trust and everything. When you hire a coach, you need to go into it trusting that coach. Now, if that coach betrays you, that's one thing. You lost your trust in that coach, right? But if they haven't betrayed you and they're like doing everything in their power to see you succeed and you feel like there's a good reciprocated energy, you have to remember too, coaches are humans too. They're not going to be able to be at 100% all the time. They're not always going to be able to reply to you within 2 seconds of you reaching out to them, et cetera, right? But as long as there's that healthy dynamic of like you're going into it relieved of your baggage from the past, now it's okay to be like use caution, right? That's one thing. Or to be on the lookout for maybe red flags, but to be hyper vigilant about it or to go into it with a lack of trust, it's just going to spell for disaster on both sides, right? Especially for you as an athlete, because at the end of the day, you hire a coach for them to guide you and to take you to where you want to go and lay it all out for you in terms of what that looks like, as well as like making the right calls and decisions based on the feedback and how the tips kind of ship is kind of handling the seas and all that kind of stuff, right? But just this is like a little bit of a call to action for people to do maybe a little bit of a bit of an audit with themselves in terms of self-awareness. Like, is there, because people do that, we would do this like if you were maybe on the dating scene, right? Like as an example, right? It's like you kind of maybe analyze things that have gone wrong in the past, like, what are things that you're looking for, et cetera. Maybe you need to do some healing from negative things that happened to you in the past, whether it's even relationships with your parents can trickle into that kind of stuff, like childhood stuff, whatever it may be, right? Having the self-awareness to dig into yourself and like, where are things from the past affecting me now? And I don't think that people necessarily do that when it comes to coaching, like coaching dynamics. And I think that that's something that could be really valuable for people. It's like, what are maybe some negative experiences I've had in the past with coaches? Where was I at fault, for example? Am I just blame shifting? Like, because like I said, we do audits like this for other relationships, but why don't we do it for like the coaching athlete dynamic, right? And usually it takes two to tango too. Like if there's, maybe, and oftentimes, like a lot of the times, it's just that it wasn't the right fit, right? Like maybe the athlete and the coaches, it just wasn't the right fit. It just wasn't the right dynamic. Maybe they did need a different coach. That doesn't mean that the athlete's at fault. It doesn't necessarily mean the coach's at fault, right? Athletes come and go. But with that being said, doing it like if you're maybe transitioning to working with a new coach, or maybe you're just getting into your journey and you're wanting to start working with the coach for the first time, I highly encourage individuals to sit there and do a bit of an audit. What are things I'm looking for? What are things that are really important to me in terms of the coaching experience? And then do a self audit as well. Like, where where have things happened in the past that may be affecting me now in order to fully trust a coach, to be fully coachable athlete, to follow the program and to have faith in the process? What are my detriments? Like where can I improve? Where can I be a better athlete? Maybe doing a bit of an audit there could be really helpful because I think a lot of athletes will be a little bit hypercritical of coaches and not be critical of themselves as athletes maybe. And I think writing a little bit more of a balance would be beneficial to just a general dynamic. And at the end of the day, what's the priority here? What is the goal of working with a coach and athlete working with a coach? It's to lead the athlete to success, right? So we're trying to drive positive outcomes here. And just being on the same page with that, us coaches, good coaches at least, I know for myself, I'm always analyzing like where can I be better as a coach, right? Like where can I be better as a coach? How can I lead better? Where can I increase my knowledge in terms of nutrition, supplementation, exercise, PEDs, everything across the board, right? I'm always trying to be better. I'm always analyzing myself. Where can I improve? And, doing the same thing as an athlete and then growing together in that coach athlete dynamic can be, I think, is something that needs to be talked about a little bit more. What do you think?
Yeah. You see so many competitors that will be with a coach for one season and then maybe they didn't do great. So then they switch to another, the coach hopping. Maybe, like you said, maybe it wasn't the right fit with how y'all communicate, but a lot of times it's just they're not giving, enough time for the process itself. That's our, yeah, we've been together for working together for since fall of 2022, so close to 4 years, and, I trust you in the process. If you're That's not to say if you have questions, like, especially when it comes to your health, that's something I think in the past, I wish I had more information about getting your lab work done, supplementation, for kidneys, liver, like, I wish I had, been given that knowledge from my coaches in the past. So definitely ask those kind of questions. But yeah, if it's, you know, 2 weeks after you've been given, a training plan and you're wanting it to switch and all of that, that's more just maturing in bodybuilding and, maturing in being an athlete. And that just takes time, And then I guess another thing and it sometimes takes time is like understanding how to communicate with your coach in the sense that like how much you need to tell them, on your weekly check ins.
Mhm.
Exactly. Telling them that you were sick, that you were under the weather versus like telling them your life story for the week and just that communication. I know this is going a little off topic, but
No, you're good.
just understanding how to communicate with your coach takes time. So just that process itself. Yeah.
Yeah, communication is extremely important. And, good coaches are going to be really focused on, making sure that they're thorough with communication, but it's like a balance, right? We want to be thorough with communication where, we're addressing things that need to be addressed while eliminating like some of the fluff, right? Because, if we're just throwing way too much information at an athlete, it kind of takes away from their ability to focus on the meat and potatoes and the fundamentals of what they really need to be doing. It's a balance. And the same thing goes for the athlete, right? So providing us, first and foremost, the information that we're asking for, right? As coaches, right? There's a reason that we ask for that information. And then, the additional stuff that needs to be communicated. And, I'm empathetic because, maybe it's a newer athlete or somebody that's never worked with a coach before, or maybe doesn't understand like, everything that goes into what we're looking at for like fatigue accumulation, for example, right? Like you mentioned, feeling sick. Maybe somebody had a little bit of a sore throat or like felt a little bit fatigued, but don't feel like they need to report that because they don't think that it's maybe they don't think it's relevant to what we're doing. Maybe they just don't know. And, that's not necessarily their fault, but, understanding, and that's something that can develop over time, right? But maybe a more advanced athletes should know that's like that kind of stuff's really important to communicate with your coach, being thorough without adding too much fluff, right? Because it's one thing to maybe express some of your concerns with your coach or like, hey, I had this like kind of hit to my personal life this week or something like that, letting us know, but also like at some point there's details that we don't need to know, right? Like there's certain details that we just don't need to know. But writing that balance, because that's what we try to do as coaches is writing that balance. That something I'm always conscious of is the feedback that I'm collecting from athletes every single week, for example. I try to write a balance of like what is necessary and like what is superfluous. So like figuring out like where can I eliminate some fluff as well as like what's sustainable for the athlete, right? It's like if I because the more tasks I'm throwing at somebody, the harder it is for them to focus on the most important things of their programming, right? So if I'm having them collect every bit of data under the sun and then they're like just they run out of time to even be able to get their breakfast in the morning before they head to work because they're tracking every single biofeedback data collection that is even possible. It's like it becomes detrimental, right? So writing that balance is what I focus on as a coach. So it's the same thing as an athlete. You want to focus on writing that balance of what feedback you're providing without it being a detriment. You also don't want to be wasting your time typing out like multiple paragraphs to your coach. Then he's having to sift through that information to figure out what's actually going on too. And then it makes it harder so to coach. But what are some things on because I it's been a while since I've been an athlete myself working with a coach. I've pretty much self-coached at this point. I actually self-coached for my last show that I did as well, with the help of another coach who kind of oversaw my peak and stuff. But what are some things that you see from your end or strategies that you utilize as an athlete to provide me like the right amount of information and knowing the importance of certain information and the lack of importance of other information? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, like I said, we've been working together for a couple years now, so I think that dynamic has been pretty solidified, and like the information that I am going to provide to you if certain things are going on. I feel like as an athlete, if you put yourself in the shoes of like I don't know, I want like a job, keeping it more professional maybe is the way to put it. In that you know I'm going to tell you anything that's going to or put on my check-in sheet, essentially, anything that could potentially, cause, like, um, any issues or any, reasons why maybe, like, sleep was impacted or, like, blood glucose was impacted, anything like that, it's gonna be noted in the check-in sheet. If it's, around your, like, menstrual cycle, like, things like that. That's what's how like you already know that's might be why there's weight fluctuations. And so I think just the pertinent information, knowing like what that is, and then leaving all the superfluous.
Mhm.
I always mess up that word, but leaving that stuff out. And that's just maturity because I can go back to like my messages from like 2018, 2019 that I was sending my coaches. And I was like, what was I saying? That sounded like I was having like a text message conversation with someone, And so just understanding like the it's a different dynamic. Like this is coming at it from like I'm a pro now, yes, but even before I was a pro, like conducting yourself in a professional manner, to your coach, because you're here to do a job. You're here to get a job done, whether it's a stage goal or just like a fitness journey goal. Like you're here to get a job done. So
Yeah, I love that you mentioned like professionalism and maturity as well, because that's something like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is kind of can be developed over time as well. It's things that you learn. Like I mentioned, the athlete that may be coming in that hasn't really worked with a coach before, maybe it's their first time, whether it's lifestyle or bodybuilding competitor, etc. They may not know that they may not truly understand what feedback we're looking for or how we're taking that stuff into account. They may be able to learn that over time, especially if a coach is being pretty thorough in their communication back to you in terms of what they're looking at feedback wise. That's what I try to do with like my check-ins, for example. I will kind of emphasize certain things. I go through like all the feedback and emphasize certain things like what I'm looking at and help an athlete understand where my decisions are coming from and what I'm looking at, as well as like emphasize the things that they need to be emphasizing every week in terms of being consciously aware of or things that they need to be monitoring themselves so that they can provide me better feedback so that I can make better decisions, right? So, stuff comes with time. Professionalism is really important because it's like, because I started my career as a personal trainer, for example, and, you know, some athletes maybe rapport is extremely important and you learn that early on, but to an extent, there's like a kind of a hard stop there at some point where, it can be taken too far. Sometimes, like when I was doing in person training, for example, it was like there was always those clients that like you could tell that they were just wanting to pay for friendship basically. Like they wanted somebody to come like talk to for an hour, right? And it's like they weren't really there for the workouts. Like they just wanted somebody to talk to essentially. And, that kind of stuff's important. But, as I've gone through matured in my career and everything, it's like less and less of that is even present. Like, we're not friends. I mean, like, there's rapport there and we're like friends and stuff, but it's like to what extent, right? And it's really a matter of professionalism where, we're in this to my objective is to get you to the goal that you have stated to me, right? So if you tell me that you want to get to a certain place or you want to turn pro, I'm going to tell you what it's going to take to get there and how long it's going to take to get there and what we need to do to get there. And it's up to you to kind of do the things that I'm asking of you to get there. Right. So, it's just really stripping that down into kind of a basic level. And, athletes leave sometimes because it's like they're looking for somebody they can chit chat with, or they want a little bit more like, and community is important. Don't get me wrong. And we facilitate community here at Saga for sure, especially with like our power hours and stuff like that. And we want people to, build. I try to facilitate a community too, where like our athletes are able to build connections with amongst themselves and train together and that kind of stuff. Where I'm a little bit more detached from that. I help facilitate and lead it, but not necessarily being like hands on, just like friends with everybody, because I don't think that that's a positive way of leading or running a coaching team, in my opinion. But, some athletes may be looking for that. And it's like kind of like when I was doing my in person training, where it's like I had that individual that was more like they were dilly dallying on the gym floor. They didn't really get like, but they kept paying me because they wanted somebody to talk to every day for an hour. And there's, I mean, not necessarily anything wrong with that, right? But, understanding that if that's what you're looking for as an athlete, I would do some self reflecting as well. We've talked about self reflecting, but I wouldn't be, and I'm not trying to be too harsh on any athletes or anything. And I'm definitely not trying to like place a lot of blame on athletes necessarily. Like I said, I wouldn't be doing that if I wasn't so critical of myself as well and do so much self reflection myself in terms of my coaching abilities and the way that I coach, the way I communicate, all those things. I'm always doing this stuff. So this is a leading by example sort of thing, not necessarily like a deflection of responsibility, if that makes sense. I think that it takes two to tango. I think that it takes two to like when it comes to athlete coach dynamic, I think that it's a two-way street and it takes both parties on the same page to get to success. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
So, progress can be delayed by like avoidable decisions. Sometimes it's not like a lack of effort, right? Sometimes it's maybe like an athlete making a mistake, for example, that maybe they didn't know, or maybe they like messed something up or did something against their better judgment. Mistakes can cost a lot of time, especially like if you're in the middle of contest prep, for example. Now, you've been pretty flawless with your contest prep. So, is there anything that you've done like during a contest prep, for example, that like you may have seen as a mistake and like, how did it kind of cost you when there's less room for error when we're in, an environment like a contest prep, for example?
As I mentioned earlier, definitely earlier on in my, bodybuilding journey, I made a lot of mistakes, whether it was like peer pressure to go out and drink or, which may have caused like you to miss a meal. Or there's even been like a time I remember going to the store and I grabbed, I thought what I thought was like a Gatorade Zero and it was a regular Gatorade, but I was so like not thinking and I drank that. And then like completely, again, this was earlier on, so I didn't understand like the bigger picture. Like it didn't make that much of a difference. But or even just like when I had first started um my very first prep and kind of the initial stages, that was my first time being on like a meal plan. And like having structure of only eating those things. And did I go off that plan? And go have a bowl of ice cream at night. Yeah, because I didn't have that. I had never been through that before. So obviously those mistakes, that was my first prep. So I didn't have the muscle maturity that I have now, and I still did well, but definitely learned from those mistakes, right? That's not something that you can do during your prep. I'd say now more so it's on the mistakes that I might make are more on the mental side, of getting too narrow focused and too closed in, and then kind of like shutting people out, which I've tried to, be cautious and conscientious of that, because I have noted that about myself is I'll get the blinders on, which is good, but when it's affecting your personal life, it affects the others around you. That's I don't know if you would categorize that as a mistake, but something I'm working on.
Yeah, no, that's good. And this is a good, example of you being reflective of yourself and being self aware as an athlete and looking for areas that you can improve. And we've mentioned that multiple times within this podcast. So, like with what you mentioned about like right now in terms of isolating yourself, that's something that maybe we don't talk about enough when it comes to the bodybuilding journey, for example. Like, I mean, we hear that it's like can be isolating, right? But talking about like from a more psychological or like philosophical aspect of like what isolation can really do to you mentally, for example, and where that's really stemming from throughout a bodybuilding journey. And part of it is a kind of a positive thing, right? We talked about like when you bodybuild or you quit drinking or whatever it may be, it kind of weeds out like where those real friends lie, for example, and who was there just as they were just self-serving, they just wanted your company or they just wanted you to be a good time and contribute to their own fun, like that kind of stuff, right? So in a way, there's a positive aspect to weeding out who you should truly value within your relationships and who may have been there for the wrong reasons. And then there's the aspect of where it becomes more of an extreme thing where you really start to isolate yourself and cut out people that maybe you shouldn't be cutting out, for example, and people's maybe somebody that's really supportive of you and you shut them out when you shouldn't, like that kind of stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
And it starts to become like an extreme of like eliminating distractions, for example. I think a really good, example of this too is a movie called Whiplash that I'm not sure how many people have seen, but it's a fantastic film. It's one of my favorite movies, to be honest. But it's essentially this drummer who goes to school to learn music, and the instructor is extremely hard on him, right? He's hard on everybody to an extreme, and it's like becomes borderline like psychologically abusive and stuff. But basically, he's striving to become the best jazz drummer he possibly can be, like one of the greats, one of the greatest jazz drummers of all time. And he essentially like there's a lot of scenes where he's like cutting out a lot of people. Like he's like, I want to be the best, and I just can't have any distractions. He like breaks up with his girlfriend who just cares about him and has been like she did nothing wrong. She's just there like being supportive and stuff. And he like breaks up with her. He's like isolating himself. He's being rude to everybody, snapping at people. And that's a good example of like when you're really trying to achieve greatness, like that stuff can happen, And sometimes when people are really, really striving towards greatness, that's like a dark side that maybe isn't shown very often, right? Where we're really like isolating ourselves and cutting people out. And then when it's all said and done, we're just left alone, right? And it's not worth it at the end of the day, especially bodybuilding. Like it's one thing if you're, becoming a professional athlete that's like going to make millions, tens of millions of dollars, and then you can buy the people that you cut out a house and then build that relationship back up, right? But with bodybuilding, you end up with maybe a plastic trophy at the end or your little pro card and stuff, which is awesome. I'm not trying to talk shit about bodybuilding necessarily because it's my livelihood. I love bodybuilding, but at the same time, we want to be cautious of who we're cutting out, and especially if it's people that really care about us, people that are really supportive. Shutting people out is just not the strategy, and there's ways to balance it all. So as a coach, I try to work on that stuff too with athletes. Like, hey, like it's okay, like take your like, go to the movies with your friends. Like you don't have to drink, you can still go out and not drink. I don't know why it's like this is such a hard thing for people to grasp, And I think a lot of that kind of stems from boundary setting, right? Like you have to learn how to set hard boundaries because it's the over explaining, it's the apologies to people. It's like that stuff that is where you mess up, right? So, for example, if you're going to go out and like you want to spend time with friends, even if you're in prep, right? And you just order a damn Topo Chico at the bar. Like if somebody's like, "Hey, are you not drinking tonight?" It's like, "No, I'm not drinking tonight. I'm bodybuilding, but I still want to spend time with you guys. Like I'm having a great time." Like don't you don't have to over explain yourself. You don't have to be like, oh well, sorry man, I'm just like really not like you don't have to do all that because then people see that as like a as an opening too to like, oh come on, just one drink's not gonna hurt. You can just get tequila, soda, lime, and you'll be fine. It's like that's where it opens the door for that. If you just say no, like I'm having a good time, I don't drink. You just say that. And I don't drink at this point in my life either. I've been sober for a year and a half. I didn't have any issues with alcohol. It just wasn't serving me. And I feel like I'm just better off without it. And I don't miss it whatsoever either. I haven't had a single sip of alcohol. But with that being said, like when I go out all the time, like I went to a Rockets game recently. I go to concerts. I still do things, right? I go to sporting events and I'm just like, I just don't drink. And somebody's like, hey, you want to drink? Nope. I'll just take a water. It's like
Yeah.
you don't need to explain yourself, right? Setting those boundaries is important. So, what are some things that you've learned when it comes to boundaries and the importance of those things?
Yeah. I definitely have, with bodybuilding, like my boundaries, of like I'm not gonna not check the boxes there, right? So if something is gonna like intervene with that, I'm pretty strict about that. But I'm also a person that I like to say that I get this from my mom that I don't like to say no to people either. If, you need me to do X, Y, and Z for you and help you out, I want to be there for you and I want to help you out and I want to do that. But again, yeah, it's that conflict of setting your boundaries because if it's gonna derail you from your progress or from your goals, if it doesn't align, then you'd have to learn to say no. And that's been, I'd say, over the last, 3, 4 years, something I've become better at saying no to things that don't align for me. And it doesn't in a polite way, right? It's not like, no, I'm not gonna do that ever. It's unfortunately I can't do this. However, you know, maybe add a solution. But yeah, it's having that bigger picture of what's the most important to you. What's like, how bad do you want it? And if it's not as important to you, then I guess your boundaries can be a little more flexible.
That's a good point. Like that can be a tell, right? Like if you have a hard time putting up boundaries and it's like people can easily just like cross over them and you easily give in. It's like maybe you didn't want it bad enough to begin with, right? Like maybe you didn't want to win on stage as much as you're telling everybody you want to win on stage. Maybe are you lying to yourself? Like is this something you really wanted to begin with? Because all it took was somebody just giving you a little bit of encouragement to like derail yourself to, fall off. So that's another good like audit to do, like a self audit to do is like how bad do you really want it and what are you willing to do to get there? And then focusing on writing that balance of like where do you put up boundaries and that some level of isolation is going to be inevitable, right? But where do we find that balance of still making an effort to connect with people that care about you and people that you care about long term and have long term relationships with and want to be able to sustain those things and to show each other support and sometimes with bodybuilding too, it's like sometimes you just don't have energy to pour into other people too. So, sometimes having that conversation with people like, hey, I still want to be able to connect with you. I still want to be able to spend time with you. I just want to be transparent. Like, I don't have a lot to give right now, like in terms of energy. So, once I'm done with this contest prep, like I'll be back to my full self, but just want to be transparent about that. Having those conversations with people can be valuable too, right? So just being transparent without over explaining yourself. I think that that's something I've been working on a bit myself this year is being a little bit less like, apologizing where I need to, taking responsibility where I need to, but focusing on not over apologizing and over explaining myself when I really have no reason to be doing so, right? Like with a drinking thing, for example, it's like it's not a problem that I had. If anything, it's like something I'm proud of myself of being able to execute well is like boundaries. Like I'm pretty good at that. I've always been pretty good at just saying no. I always say like one of my favorite things to say is no. I just say no. Do you want to like, nope, I'm good. Setting those boundaries has been extremely beneficial, but I know where to ride that balance of connecting with people, spending quality time with people, setting things up in my schedule and making sure I don't overextend myself too, where it's like, I try to make sure that anything I'm committed to, I'm fully committed to. If it's not like I don't flake on anything. If I say I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there. If I commit to, going to an event, for example, I'm 100% all in on that. And I make sure that things are organized to facilitate that too. And if I'm unsure of that, I say no, like, so that's a big thing. I always say, and I always tell myself too, if it's not a fuck yes, it's a fuck no. So like, I do this when I'm like shopping, for example, if I'm like looking at something like, oh, I kind of want this, like this new hoodie or like I want this new gadget or whatever it is, right? I'm like, do I really need it? And like, am I super stoked about it? Is it like a fuck yes? And if not, then I'm like, nope, I stop looking at it, move on with my life, right? So those boundaries with yourself as well as other people are incredibly important, right? So do you like start to, how do you ride the boundary kind of midline when it comes to like off season stuff? Are you obviously you can be a little bit more relaxed, I suppose, in the off season? Do you start to make more of an effort in the off season to connect with people? And are you trying to kind of find that midline where you can sustain that ability to connect with people the same way year round? Is that what you're striving for right now?
Yeah, the what you kind of mentioned earlier, the scheduling, like, I think I thrive on having almost a busy schedule, but I've experienced from a couple past years, like, I was overly booked, working, like, multiple jobs plus bodybuilding, and I made it work, but I was, like, in the trenches, and coming out of that kind of, that's essentially what forced me. And I also had a coworker at the time that was reassuring me, like, you just have to say no. That's all you have to do. You just have to say no. That allowed me to like be where I'm at now, where I still have a very busy schedule, but it's not chaotic and I'm not in the trenches. And that has definitely helped. Now, with off season, we did our last off season in 2024 into a little bit of 2025. I don't know, I just had the mindset, of I guess I knew I was going into prep and that, I wanted to have some structure structured, normal life, normalcy. I don't know how you wanna phrase that, but, um, so I literally and it sounds a little neurotic, but, like, would kind of plan out, like, I know I'm gonna have a lot of energy for X, Y, this many months. I'm gonna, not overly plan, but, like, I'm gonna plan to do this many things per month with, this list of people and make sure I spend time with, my loved ones, my family. And then I know like this is when my energy will start to, die down a little bit. So I'm going to lower it to this much. And then this is like the tail end of prep. This is what's devoted to me. This is my me time. It was structured and I really enjoyed it because I still went out and did things. When I had like free meals, I would go do that. But even when I didn't have free meals out, like I still went to a concert. I still went like to Top Golf, still did those things in prep. And that was my first time really being more attentive to it
Mhm.
and being more present with it. That was my main goal, was to be present with people, and I really enjoyed that. So now, gonna, now that we're in this growth phase, it's gonna be kind of a similar like off season. So similar in that like I'm gonna have those same goals to make those bonds with my close ones and make those memories and those moments because you don't get them back. And I think earlier on when I was bodybuilding, I didn't realize that I still had like the tunnel focus and I just shut everyone out. And that was
Mhm.
definitely a big mistake I made was I didn't communicate like with my family about what was going on because I didn't know. I didn't know anything about bodybuilding to begin with. So how was I supposed to tell them? But
Yeah.
I didn't communicate like how I was feeling, what I was doing, or anything like that. So they didn't know what to expect either. And then they had a very like negative concept of bodybuilding because they just saw their daughter getting like shut out from the world. Whereas now I'm more open. They understand what I do to get to my goals and what it takes. And that in the season that I'm able to be there and spend more time with them and do more things with them, that I'm there and I'm present. But when it's, that tail end of prep, that I just don't have, like you said, I just don't have the energy. And that's my me time. And they are much more supportive of me and my bodybuilding journey now that we've had that, you know, communication and that understanding.
Yeah, the common denominator that I'm seeing with a lot of these themes that we're talking about, specifically with you and like how you've matured as an athlete over time, a lot of it comes back to that self awareness piece and just self reflection. You kind of audit yourself, like, where are things that I need to be improving, like in all areas of life. It's not just like, how can I improve my physique and how can I get leaner, right? You're thinking about like, what are all these things that I can do to improve the environment around me so that I can sustain what I'm doing psychologically as well and continue this journey. And I think that's really important in just finding that those balances, and then leaning into your archetype too is really important in terms of just that self awareness piece because you've done that self reflection. You've analyzed the fact that maybe because you're a little bit more type A, we're both pretty type A people, I would say, you anchored into like making more structure around it. Like, because structure can be a positive thing. We don't always want to think that structure is just like the thing that is leading to a lack of sustainability, right? Because a lot of people, structure is their sustainability. For me and somebody like you, structure is our way to anchor back into things and stay on top of things and to we can implement that structure and build a structure around any like framework around any aspect of life, right? And you did that with relationships where you were a little bit more structured with scheduling and balancing that stuff out, where like spending time with individuals is the thing that you prioritize within that structure, right? Or you built a framework for that specific aspect of things. And that's what I tend to do too, is it's like whatever the area is in my life, I try to build a framework and a structure around it so that it makes sense. Like I recently did this, I like fine tuned my hair care and skincare routine, for example, like because I've kind of like built it up over time, but I like actually set it in stone where it's like, this is my structure, like this is the schedule, these are the products I use, etc. Right. So doing that is like a positive thing, and it's not always a negative thing. It really depends on your archetype. And I strongly encourage people to try to do some self reflection and understand themselves a little bit better. I usually say that there's like three, generally speaking, kind of like, and it's on a spectrum, right? There's like three kinds of individuals. There's the individual that like type A, right? Like full type A, just like structure. They need structure. But there's also the type A where they have to impose that structure on themselves, right? And they don't do a great job of having that structure imposed upon them from an external source. And then there's kind of somewhere in between that, right? And then there's the individuals that need a little bit more flexibility, but still want to like maybe impose on them, or they need a little bit more like ability to kind of auto regulate, I suppose, or build their own structure, right? And then there's the individuals that like don't do well with structure. They need things to be free flowing all the time. And none of them, like all three of them, don't necessarily have like an inherent like negative aspect to them, right? What works best for them works best for them. But what doesn't work is when, let's say, somebody that's really free flowing has a bunch of structure imposed on them. That's not going to work out very well. Or, somewhere like where it's just a mismatch, right? And so doing that self reflection, for example, like with you, you self reflected where, I think that you do pretty well on both sides where you do well with structure imposed on you, but you also are good at putting structure in for yourself as well. And you're somebody that likes structure and anchors and framework, right? So you've done a great job of self reflecting in regards to like, oh, this is who I am and this is how I thrive. So I'm going to implement this kind of strategy into like my personal life with like my relationships and how I'm scheduling things, right? And that's like what I do essentially too for myself. I have like all these subsections of like my life that are structured and frameworked in a certain way that makes sense for me. And it's like all in my crazy brain, and it's all like branched out. It makes perfect sense for me. But somebody that's like more free flowing would look at what I do and like have an existential crisis. So, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's been I can tell you, like, a handful of times where I've had someone just say, like, "You just need to go with the flow, like, you just need to, like, chill out and relax," and it's like, that's not in my I mean, I've learned to, in the appropriate times, where I can't do anything about it and I have to go with the flow, but, like, naturally, that doesn't flow with me. Yeah, I definitely thrive in the structure, so to each their own, yeah.
100%. And that's basically what I'm trying to mention is that like you have to analyze where those mismatches are and like own who you are, And a lot of the theme that has kind of manifested in this podcast has been self-reflection and understanding yourself better, doing self audits and all that kind of stuff. So if there's anything that anybody can take away from this specific episode, it's probably that, because it sounds like Danielle and I are individuals that do a lot of that, and it's benefited us a lot. And this, what we've discussed today, has definitely been proof of that. So, that's why Saga is very much about frameworks and systems. And like I said, just we're not about hype and just like raw motivation. You sprinkle that in every once in a while. We definitely want our athletes to be excited about the process, but that's the cherry on top of all these structures and systems that we've implemented into place. Sometimes we're not the right fit for certain athletes, and that's perfectly fine. Sometimes, like we just mentioned, that there's different archetypes, and sometimes individuals need a little bit more free flowing. Some individuals just maybe it's like a communication style. It's a part of the sport. And I encourage everybody that's listening, if you are a bodybuilding athlete, that, understanding that and just, understanding that you may just need a different fit or whatever it may be, do self reflection, understand who you are better, because the better you understand yourself, the better you're going to be able to navigate and build the environment around you that's going to help drive you towards success. Right. So, if you're somebody that likes structure and, anchors and consistency and doesn't rely on motivation, we may be the right team for you. But, just let us know, right? But do that self reflection first and, analyze what you've learned in the past and how you can better, orient yourself for the future as well, right? So we'll go ahead and close this off. Danielle, do you have any final words?
This is awesome first podcast with you, so I appreciate you letting me join in.
Awesome. Well, this is Ambitions Apex. This is the podcast you're listening to. It is ran by myself, Sean Irwin. Danielle and I are on a coaching team called Saga Coaching. And if you want to find us, just find us on Instagram at Saga Coaching, and you'll be able to find our personal hats for that as well. But thank you guys for listening. There was some pretty valuable stuff in here. Hopefully, you guys took some value from it and maybe learned some lessons from us who have been in the trenches before. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Danielle, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Your journey towards excellence does not end here. We're here to help guide you every step of the way. For more insights and to become a part of our community, follow and subscribe. Your feedback illuminates our path. Be sure to share your thoughts and stay tuned for more episodes.